Liftport Group. We've been in the space research business for about 20 years or so. We started out doing some, investigation on of the space elevator, Earth's space elevator. In 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we had a pretty good sized team, about a 14-person team, depending on which year we're talking about, to investigate carbon nanotubes and strength properties in materials, and also robotics. And I know everybody's been listening to the news with all these balloons and all that craziness. We built a bunch of high altitude balloons tethered to the ground with robots climbing back and forth. And that was pretty fun. We did some pretty interesting stuff in those days. We haven't done that work in many years, but with all of this balloon stuff in the news the last couple of weeks, we have had at least a couple interesting conversations, and there's a chance we're going to get back into that. So that's trying to take lemons and turn them into lemonade, I guess. But that's the kind of thing we would like to get back into, the work of building robots and high altitude balloons. That's furthering the work of our lunar space elevator infrastructure. We stopped working on the Earth elevator a long time ago, more than 10 years ago. We're entirely dedicated to the lunar elevator now. Fast forward during the pandemic, we came pretty close to going out of business, and we wound up doing a bunch of media stuff, really unexpected, really unplanned, where we hosted 27 virtual conferences for a lot of different space organizations: Moon Society, Mars Society, Space Frontier Foundation, Foundation for the Future, International Space University, a couple others. And then that has now pivoted towards doing podcasting as a service. Also for many of these nonprofits, we work with the Mars Society. Their shows, we just had their first episode last month. Their next episode is next week on Tuesday. That's Red Planet Live. We've got a couple other proposals in, and fingers crossed we're going to get a couple more. Our goal is to build out a pretty strong network of space-based podcasts and shows. So stick with us as we grow. It's actually been a pretty good week, so fingers crossed about some of the stuff that we'll be able to share next week. And with that, if you've been watching our show in any way at all, we kind of bounce between kind of three formats. One, we talk about policy a lot here. Two, we try to bring in the people who are actually doing the work in the field. So one-on-one interviews with some really smart people. And then occasionally a news show. And so tonight what we're doing is we're bringing in Dr. Gordon Roesler. He's got a fascinating background. We're going to dig into that a little bit. We're going to talk about automation in space. We're going to talk about this idea of a super highway and logistics. For those that don't know, I'm a former U.S. Marine. My MOS, military occupational specialty, was 0431, logistics and embarkation specialist. So I was one of those grunts that was loading ships to get other grunts from where they needed to go to where they, from where they were to where they needed to go. So I didn't know it, but I was a fan of logistics for a really long time. My ASVAB scores tested off the charts for figuring out how to get boxes into square boxes into round holes. So I'm a big fan of logistics in a lot of different ways. Terry, thanks a lot, of course, always a Marine. Yep. And so we're going to talk about what are the logistics of getting back and forth. We've got all of this stuff happening. It's fascinating. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. And yet, this morning I was tracking about a dozen space station companies. Well, that's great. That's amazing. I love that idea. but how do you get enough stuff from the ground where it is to the sky where it needs to be? There's a lot of different ways of looking at logistics. So we're going to bring in Dr. Gordon Roesler, and we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about logistics. So with that, let's bring you in. So Gordon, thanks a lot for being a part of this show. By way of my background, so everybody knows, I met him kind of briefly. We were at a virtual meeting back, I guess, 2020 and 2021, the industrial space-based meetings. Anybody who watches this show knows I've referenced them a bunch of times. I'm going to post the links here in just a moment. But these documents have become really, really important. They are kind of, I think they're kind of part of the background, the backbone of how Space Force, Defense Innovation Unit are starting to move out into space. And I think they're super important. I was invited by Dr. Joel Mosier. He is the chief scientist of the U.S. Space Force. I've been fortunate enough to get to know Colonel Eric Felt. And I've had both of them on our show. So these documents, I think, are really important. This one kind of makes me a little bit crazy because if you look at these 5 people and the 2 signatories on it, these 2 guys, General Raymond and Senator Nelson, NASA administrator, arguably these 7 people control the bulk of the world's space budget. Just kind of let that sink in for a second. And then I was really happy because I got cited in this one for coming up with the phrase Starship Singularity, which you all have heard me talk about is a big idea that with this new capability of Starship, I think everything changes. So these documents, I think, are core. I'll post the links to them in a moment. And that's how I got to know Gordon. We didn't talk back then. We didn't really chat. We were in the same room, and I'm scribbling notes, and I'm like, man, this guy is really smart. I was pretty impressed with him, really practically on moment one, because he was bringing to the table some ideas that just were not being paid attention to. So that's my preamble for Gordon. Gordon, I'd like you to kind of start with some of your background, some of your history. How did you get here? And then we're going to jump into superhighway stuff.
Before we start, I'm seeing some chat. I want to make sure that I'm answering their questions. So Jason, SGS working in conjunction with Orbital Prime. Is he seeing that? I can't tell.
Yeah, he's seeing it. Yep.
All right. My bad.
Hold on, Gordon. Let me clarify. So you posted something in private chat that's just you and I can see. The chat to respond.
How do I fix it?
Jason is on the right-hand side of the screen.
Well, there's a bunch of texts over there, but I don't. Anyway.
Okay. You can answer the question online. I mean, just like this.
All right. I don't think it's working in conjunction with Orbital Prime, but SGS. Okay. I think so. The launch in 2024, and after it'll start doing its job in 2025. So I'm a graduate of the. You started my career as a left. I was in submarines. submarine officer for 11 years. I felt the need to get back to graduate in a field that the Navy wasn't interested in. So I took duty and got physics and started to research program management. Program management research to DARPA to a program manager. And as part of that work on there was to come up with a system that was called Orbital Express. Orbital Express was a robotics replenishment system, changing batteries, changing processors that flew in 2007, successful. The program manager is now at a nuclear propulsion company, a good friend of mine. Consulting, the direct taken impression that I actually knew something about space. I applied to join the space idea. The idea was the following. Today, if you send up a satellite, it's never maintained, it's never repaired, and these things are expensive. I mean, bird, $1 billion or more for a military. So the idea was, how can we change that picture? For these spacecraft, he brought me aboard DARPA spacecraft for the universe. And I want to go on record that Sumo, because my last name is pronounced Wrestler.
Sorry.
Quite all right. So demonstration of automated robotic vehicle to a satellite. That was, and we started building the flight qualified robot arm that would do, and that's the arm or of it that's on our SGS now. So that was sort of this.
Believe it or not, I had a question about what is DARPA. So we're at a basic level here. So describe why people should care about DARPA.
Sure. DARPA is the Research Projects Agency. It was started at the same time NASA was started. Missions. NASA was in space flight and a military mission. DARPA was started not only to do space, in order to avoid taxes. President Eisenhower was, and he wanted to create and keep that kind of thing. And as DARPA has evolved in the business of creating some technology to, identifying that as the agency that invented the technet. It's the agency that developed chips to run at low power on your cell phone. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of contributions, but also to the economy. Yeah. DARPA twice. The first time was that early, and most recently 2000, developing this. And so if people don't know what DARPA is, they probably this is robotic synchronous satellites. And what's geosynchronous satellites, right? So if you've ever seen a TV, little thing, maybe a foot 2 feet, pointing at obviously a satellite. But wait, satellites have to go around, just fall down. They have to stay in orbit. And that antenna isn't moving. Always pointed in one direction. If it's pointed at a site, there is exact that goes around the Earth that the Earth turns on its, so it appears from the ground moving. That's called the G, and that is a very high value orbit. They're mostly commercial satellites, weather satellites, and that sort of thing. It goes out to that orbit that goes here is over $100 billion. Extremely valuable orbit. So the reason we're sending this satellite to GEO is from satellite to satellite in a single geostationary orbit is. So that's what our and I started and led robotic synchronous satellites.
I know you got a PowerPoint to get through, but before we do that, I want to ask you a little bit about, you talked a little about your history. What would be some strengths, some successes? What would be some weaknesses, some failures that you've encountered over your years?
So I described Orbital Express. Refuel in space. This actually flew in 2007. Customer satellite, put a new battery in it, that all worked. Everything went fine. Advantage of that technology, you built into the customer set things. So you would have had to modify of a satellite to all that tech in Orbital Express. RSGS and it's they were designed to work unmodified in any way. Today's it can come up and dock with its robot arm to help it can attach new things to the side. No modifications, no fiducial couplings or anything like that. What was as I mentioned before, I was at DARPA and helping to structure the orbital experiment. If I had it to do over again, I ended reversing those two programs. Let's do a program first that will work. You don't have to modify the design. Let's do a program to show, hey, there's more cool things you can do. You can add sort of thing. So basically, beating myself up has it been reversed. In terms of success, when I was a voice in the wilderness. I would talk about, I would hear basically three things. Commercial satellite. There's no business case for the way we do things. As you're going to talk about later, I think, writing a strategy on how this stuff happen in space.
Right.
So to watching, the argument has been, I will call that, and I think a lot of it has to do with that, despite the not the NIMBYs and that sort of thing, to this revolutionary, this transformative program. I want to thank Docker, who was the director 14 to build a flight program hard, knowing that there was going to be opposition to how we were going to do a public-private partnership. But she is today the director of technology policy at the White House.
Wow. Well, I didn't catch her name. What's her name?
ARATI
Okay.
is her first. PRABHAKAR. Just a fantastic, innovative, energetic, determined fighter. I expect our thing. There's my success and my failure.
Nice. Your failure of just like inverting the programs, that's not the kind of thing that's going to make front page news. So that's good. Congratulations for that. There was a pretty big time gap between those two, though. So when did you realize that?
There was. So we, after the career demonstration, DARPA, a fund of a flight qualified robotic arm was finished, including all the environmental. It sat in a box. There was a DARPA director, and then who started a program to use it. Got a lot of opposition in the business case. In 2014, they asked me to come in and start a flight program. And time in there. And
doesn't that break your heart where you put all that effort into it and it just sits on a shelf, or if it's a report, it's in a binder that's never read and it just becomes dusty? Doesn't that stuff break your heart? Because that makes me a little bit crazy.
What happens in high tech all the time, right? There are can be fully developed and deployed. We have to prepare for results. But even if it had, I think there was so much innovation that was contained there that.
Yeah. Well, you're lucky you were able to kind of bring it back to life. I mean, it might have been a zombie project, but it
was DARPA. It was to life. I just happened to be the point person.
Cool. Fascinating. Let's go ahead and bring up your PowerPoint. And let's talk about, while you're doing that, I'm going to screen share your article. So you do that and I'll do this. So pointing out that this is about a year and a half ago. It's pretty important to get an article into the Hill. You can sway an awful lot of people that have discretionary budgets and the power to make bills and laws happen. So I'm going to post this link. It's definitely worth reading. But the idea of life extension missions and the history of the actual America's superhighway system, I think some people know it's based off of Eisenhower's experience when he was in World War II. So pretty interesting stuff here. But if the
let me
yeah, go ahead, please.
About that article. The last time I checked, 424 times invisibility.
Say that again, please.
I said the last time I checked, the superhighway in space had been shot.
I'm missing that last piece. It was the last time. One more time.
I checked It was shared.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I know that I saw it, I believe, from let's see, Garrettson. I get a lot of I get a lot of my kind of current thinking from Peter Garrettson. I mean, he writes a lot. He's writing all the time, and he's kind of got his finger on the
Pete and
pulse
I
of
have
stuff.
at least 8 years.
Yeah.
We got to know each other. Forward thinking think tank.
Yep.
Yeah, he is on the state of the space industrial base.
Yeah, he's I look to him to get kind of current events on what's happening at the kind of the national policy space stuff. Of course, he's a giant advocate of space-based solar power, as am I. And you're only going to do that stuff if you've got robots in space. So it all kind of comes together. He and his co-author on a book that just came out, I don't know anything about it yet. They're going to be doing a briefing, and they asked me to be involved with that. So I just got that email today. So I don't know the whole story about it, but
Dr. Namrata Goswami, brilliant policy and strategy. Yeah, they did great work in that book.
Goswami is going to be a guest of ours. I think it's March 8th. It might be March 13th, something like that. She's going to be on our show next month, real soon. Yeah. We've got some great guests. I'm pretty happy about this show. We've been able to pull in some good guests, and we've got more coming. So let's go ahead and have you jump into your slides here. Remember that the audience is mostly audio, so describe your slides as you're bringing them up, please.
Sure. Super highway here on the title slide. I think when it back in 2019, article in Aviation Week and Space Technology, value in Earth orbit, concepts, space logistics. We were talking about in 2019. On to the next slide. Hey, I've gone through pretty much. That's what this slide's all about. So picture the article on the right. So go on to what I call this on. What are the new things that are happening? Weren't part of the exploration thing. We already had Artemis 1, the moon, and come back. A lot of development in thinking about sustainable habitat, and all of this is also with the idea. So the program is more advanced and back in the Apollo program. So scientifically, I think everybody is on Mars, Perseverance, and Curiosity. Interestingly, the company that built the robot arms for those rovers is the same company that's. I think in some of the images from the James Webb Space Telescope, NASA is talking about the in-space astrophysical observation, the habitable worlds observed. That will be so large that it's assembled in space and not just long. About space hotels, seriously, there's Axiom is working with on the International Space Station and become part of space, commercial space station. A lot of funding and going into Harvest Moon. It is confirmed the poles of the moon, there is a significant of water ice in that the sunlight doesn't get into. This is valuable when it's on the moon. I mean, it costs $50,000 a pound to get. So how about if we can instead, so you can drink the water, when you can break it down into hydrogen, the oxygen to breathe, or you can together as rocket propellant. Also, people looking at the minerals on the moon and what we think. And then an effort going into manufacturing. Why would you do that when we have on the Earth? Well, you would do it for higher quality if they're made in space. So certain possibly artificial organs, some pharmaceuticals, and many other things to manufacture on the Earth. Now, what do activities have in common? Space forms and exploration, habits from manufacturing. They all logistical support. They all need logistical support. And if they all had to solve their own logistics, maybe a lot of these would never happen. Farther in the future, right? You mentioned space-based solar power. Space-based solar power has become, but also economically, strategically important. The multi-planet species, Jeff Bezos, people living and working in space, turning Earth. Hey, these all need logistics. So there's a theme here. The next slide, 6 today. There's a picture of the International Space Vehicles, all of which are supplied by the International Space Station. Bring a cargo and they're humans to the space station. That's all that space logistics is today. The International Space Station. So this slide describes it is a single, multifaceted in space, and stretching all the way from low Earth orbit in between and possibly supporting. My vision, get a little water. My vision is that it's primarily privately funded, government providing seed funding, and then saying, hey, we'll be a customer for you. Use this transportation and to do the R&D that is made many of the other systems. Incredible opportunities to support activities that I talked about. There are benefits. It unlocks value. Explaining what unlocks, I always use Amazon as Bezos did not have to create work. It already existed, UPS. And suddenly it's one of the 5 largest entrepreneurs will figure out new logistics system that Jeff thought of how to digital finance. Support for international partnerships, people to the system that are detached in orbit, much cheaper than putting them on a rocket sort of thing. So it's a commercial system, but with real strategic good ones. So and destinations. So I show with this, the closest circle is our origin for everything. The next Earth is geosynchronous orbit, kind of the distance to the moon. Over on the lunar orbit, we also have two little Lagrange points, L1 and L2. Those are the could be a customer of the logistic system will be strange orbit called near rectilinear. And we can also support a lot of these could be two-way. For example, a line between low lunar orbit and be resources coming back. So a lot of different places. The next slide and depots and platforms is a space to create a logistics network in space. You need orbits, things to move lights, commodities from whether it's going out to geosynchronous or something in between. A lot of propellant.
Yeah.
Moving things around intensive. So we're going to need fuel depot, and there are a couple of programs going on right now. Those look like, and where should we put them? The thing you need is places where you can take payloads and just solve. This actually reduces every payload has to be a fully integrated. You can get away from that and just say, hey, I've got a box. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Put it on some vehicle. We'll get a transfer vehicle, which you can think of a train, and take it to where it needs to go, attach it, be provided communications and power, that sort of thing. And actually, there's one thing missing here, which space superhighway is also going to need, and positioning. We take advantage of GPS on happening beyond GPS. We're not a signal, so we have to figure out how to provide them now. So just communications. They have to talk to each other, maintain an awareness. So there's a lot to be done to implement. This next slide talking about, well, is this all science? There are things that have already been that this is completely viable. I've been referring to this thing called actual picture in orbit customer satellite, and it has a box on it, a new processor, and that was in. So robotic manipulation and install phase has already been demonstrated in space. In the lower right, we have space that can help spacecraft in orbit. Two of these are on the internet being tested in terms of how much power can they pass through, and all those sorts of things. It is a exception of two satellites that are being operated by Northrop Grumman, extension vehicles. Realize satellites need to be in the right place in orbit, out, and then they have to be disposed of. As the CEO of Intel, if I have a satellite that's making money, what do I want to do to extend the life of the satellite? Grumman developed these things called vehicles, and the first one went one in 2021 on Intelsat, and they're using their own satellites in place, so the Intelsat birds can keep sending data down to the Earth, making money for their customers. When Northrop Grumman, the eyes of the entire community open, amazing feat, right? You bring us another satellite that was in no way to have another satellite dock with it, connected flawlessly today. So that was a real. On the left page is a drawing.
Yeah, that's
one of the flight robotic arms for the Army. It's hard to see the scale of this 2.5 meters long. It says it's a docking mechanism. In addition to those are being transferred to Northrop Grumman satellite that these will be mounted on. GS bird. Northrop Grumman refers to the satellite, the MRV, the mission robotic, and they're going to continue to use that to and some other missions and then at the bottom there's a couple of interface fluid, and these are getting ready to like propellant. It says who would use it. This is customers, and as you can see, there are a lot of them. I mean, there's over 20 slide. Civil customers, commercial customers. So on the right, life extension, we've already talked about that, right? Mission extension vehicles. You can think of them as you think of Lunar Resource Company had to bring or had to develop its own logistics system to products. Most of them wouldn't make it. Manufacturing, we've talked about private space stations. Now, on the included logistics do they need? Well, no concern about well, what if instruments fail? Place those more quickly, like happened to Go 7. If you had a logistics network and robotic manipulate, you could repair than just having to replace them. People that are developing lunar habitats or thinking about the logistics do we have to bring. Successor to James Webb is something that may have to be. And we talk a little bit about the military. Why did in space doing the old thing of sending up a satellite and afraid up there? The Space Force wants to be able to maneuver without reducing their lifetime, able to maneuver defensively for change. We want more infrared coverage over you. Let's move a bird from one part of the orbit to that. Today, you reduce the life of the space is the life of the spacecraft, unless you can refer logistical need to upgrade their satellites more quickly and send the next generation of satellites to come along. Plugging in some new electronic orbital equivalent of a connector. So many potential clients, space logistics network, that the chances of it's being used are is referred to the obviously developing a national strategy servicing assembly. They regard logistics as part of They started working on this in 2020. Dr. Ezenet, the leader of the interagency at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, pulling together all of the concerns of multiple government agencies. Strategy back in April of 2010 and October, implementation plan that gave specific agencies to make this happen. It's very gratifying to me. Years ago, I was the voice in the wilderness thinking about how to make this happen. I want to talk about once you mentioned the Starship singularity. It talks a little bit about the interface with the Space Logistics Network. Deliver 100 tons to low Earth orbit at a very amazing. That's a game changer.
Yeah.
Terrestrially, just to that. Well, think of the big, like the one that got stuck in the Suez Canal. Those things move cargo up to 20,000 containers at very low cost. Port. Those for that one port. There are trucks deliver those containers to destinations, right? So it's easy to have Starship have to go around, the high position it is. What would make up orbital transfer vehicles, space tug, parts of the Starship cargoes to those. So you can think of the Starship as a super highway, just as the big containers for the ground network of containers the rest of the way. Makes maximum use of Starship's high mass capabilities. It's really synergistic.
Yeah.
That was my my slides. Stop sharing those, Michael, if you want. Ready for listening. I hope you found it.
Let's keep them up. Let's keep them up, Gordon, for a minute longer. I want to come back and ask a couple questions on here. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I want to be a little bit succinct. But starting to like the second or third slide, there was something. It's hard to tell. No, keep going. Keep going.
No.
All right. Let's stick with the logistics for a second. So the slide just before that. Well, this one too. They're both the same. So
okay, they both for logistics.
Yeah. When you are talking about logistics, what comes to mind? To me, a long time ago as a jarhead, we had to get stuff from where it was to where it needed to go. You're really talking about the same thing, only at a much more complicated scale, right? I like this. This is the slide I wanted to get to. That's what it was.
Yeah. So different people needs on different time scales. So worry about supplying a lunar until we're pretty close to having a lunar habitat. But spacecraft, the satellites are going to be launched in, I think, have refueling ports on them. Is probably going to want to be one of the first logistics network. Shortly, electronics payloads that can be sent in orbit to change the performance of these assets. Commercial people, a company invests a a billion geocom satellite, and so they wind up with this, expensive platform up there. But if they take up there, it's and revenue producing for longer. It's kind of it's faster to develop for the logistics network, the tugs and hosting platforms and that sort of thing. Those can be developed, and most of the customers will show up. The trick is to start getting these things and build them with enough flexibility, like arms, which allow you to have things that you can manipulate, right? And available to all these potential customers.
Okay, so let's take a real problem that's actually occurring right now. We're not supposed to call to rescue, but there's a mission that's been pushed back. The Russians have had some problems with some coolant leaks on two different spacecrafts back to back, so that's a little spooky. They're supposed to have the quote unquote, you're not supposed to call it a rescue mission, that was again delayed. I don't know if it launched today, but it was supposed to launch yesterday and it got delayed. That's a logistics problem also. So how would you solve this stuff, right? You've got folks that are, nobody's in harm's way right now, but if a bad thing happened, you can't rescue the crew that's up there. So when I think logistics, I also think standby resources.
Yeah, let's look at that from let's imagine multiple space, right? China will have one, commercial, maybe at near L1 could potentially benefit from a spacecraft, but building one for each, sitting right there at each space station, having one on orbit, and if it has on board, have the refueling capability, the same using for these other missions, to get it where it needs to go. So, right, if you can just have one rescue, a bunch of them.
Okay. Yeah, I when I think of the flight heritage that the Russians and prior the Soviets had, I'm pretty amazed that they haven't had more problems, candidly, along the way. But the idea of having a backup spacecraft, I think, is maybe an overdue problem. I think we're kind of seeing it up close and personal right now, that the logistics of space have been, for the most part, ignored, and they're going to become front and center now.
Yeah, but I will say that if you had well, let's take another example. There's a space stations, and you have to get logistics to them, whether it's a first aid kit, parts, or whatever. Right. Their gateway near L1 in its near rectilinear halo orbit. SpaceX has a contract to the gateway.
Yeah.
But those flights, right? What if you have between the flights? So if there's this robust, it gives you the opportunity to respond. And that's one of the things that the space is really challenged by right now. Is everything's done on these schedules and that sort of thing. If we have greatly increased the flexibility of the whole system.
Cool. Okay, with that, I'm gonna say goodbye to Gordon. Dr. I want to make sure I pronounce your name right because I got it wrong. Roesler? Did I get? Is it?
It's like sumo.
Wrestler. Okay, that's what I thought I said. Okay, wrestler. So terrific having you, sir. Appreciate your time and insights. Just stick around for a couple seconds. I'm gonna showcase something. First, let's see. Leah wrote a pretty interesting blog. I think it's worth taking a look at. I'm going to post a link here. Last week, Seraphim, a large
investment
venture company, venture capital company, came up with this ecosystem map. And this goes back to Jason's comment a minute ago. This ecosystem that's coming online is staggering. We've got a link to it in the post that Leah wrote a little while ago. But I mean, just look at this. There's 19 orbital tug companies. Like, that's bonkers to me. This section, this in-space services section with debris removal, life extension. Look at that. This is what Gordon's actively working on. OrbitFab, Rogue, all of these folks came up in our conversation today. And just this one section of in-space services is about 65 companies. Some of them are repeated. But this whole space infrastructure element goes directly to what Gordon was talking about, a little bit of lunar development, in-space manufacturing. This is the world that we're building right now. And so it's pretty exciting to see it move from, the experimental stage at DARPA to real world development. So Gordon, thanks so much for being a part of this. Thank you for sharing your experience, and that was Jason's comment a moment ago. We'll see you back again soon. Thanks a lot, sir.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned junk removal. That's something I didn't get definitely another application.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. We appreciate it. Who do we have coming up? We got some, we've got Namrata Goswami. We've got Matthew Matthew's going to be great because I don't know if I'm pronouncing it. It's Apiotis rockets. Gosh, I got that wrong. I'll have to look that one up. We've got we've got some terrific guests coming up in the next couple of weeks. We are going to be talking about policy. There's been some new documents that came out just this afternoon. NASA came out with 2 new documents about how to use the International Space Station. So that's kind of unexpected. So we'll be looking at policy here pretty soon. With that, good night, y'all. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.